agencies even before the pandemic. We did not fail to collect revenues when people could not go out to file their income tax returns and pay their tax dues. In fact, 90% of the total number of annual tax returns were filed electronically in 2020. This year, the total number of annual income tax returns filed online grew to almost 100% from just 10% in 2015. Our solid financial footing allowed us to enter 2020 with a full set of ammunition to fight the pandemic. We had a two-decade high revenue effort at 16.1% of GDP, compared to only 15.1% in 2015. This helped us bring down our debt to GDP ratio to a historic low of 39.6% from 42.7% in 2015. We also won the highest credit rating ever when S&P upgraded us to BBB+ in 2019. We did not lose this rating up to this day. Despite weakened revenue collection due to the lockdowns, we never ran out of cash resources. We are still able to meet the large spending of our COVID-19 related emergency measures. Due to the pandemic, our total loss in terms of revenues amounted to 1.4 trillion pesos in 2020. We had to source about 709 billion pesos in financing to support our additional expenditures. When we needed to borrow to support our budget in the midst of a public health crisis, we were able to do so expeditiously and on very good terms. We utilized cash buffers built from borrowings through domestic bond offerings, official development assistance, and the international capital markets. We did not suffer constrained fiscal space despite the recent increase in borrowings. The affordability of our debt remains manageable, with interest payments as a share of revenues increasing slightly from 11.5% in 2019 to 13.3% in 2020. This is still better compared with the 14.7% in 2015. Meanwhile, our interest payments as a share of expenditures even improved to 9% last year from 13.9% in 2015. This indicates that our additional debt is being beneficial to our recovery and development agenda rather than being a burden to growth. The average interest rate of our debt portfolio was reduced from 5.2% in 2015 to 4.2% in 2020. This indicates that our interest payment burden did not rise in proportion to the increase in our debt stock. The interest rates did not go up because of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas' well-calibrated monetary policy responses. The BSP quickly reduced policy rates and reserve requirements to ensure adequate domestic liquidity and to sustain credit flow. To further strengthen the banking system, the economic team quickly pushed for the passage of the FIST, or Financial Institutions Strategic Transfer Act. The measure allows banks to efficiently offload their bad loans and non-performing assets. This is similar to the SPV, or Special Purpose Vehicles Law of 2003. But unlike the SPV law that was enacted 5 years after the 1997 Asian financial crisis, this was implemented within the first year of the pandemic. Meanwhile, our currency did not plunge in value as it did in 1997 because of the BSP's sound and prudent reserve management. We sustained a healthy level of foreign reserves that actually could cover our total external debt. When the crisis hit us, much of the spade work was done. We really did not have to go back to the drawing board in order to plan for the country's economic recovery. We stuck to our tax reform program and passed CREATE, or the Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentives for Enterprises Act. CREATE is the largest ever fiscal stimulus program for businesses in our recent history through the hefty reduction in corporate income tax rates. In addition, CREATE opens the way for us to rationalize our tax incentive system to ensure that fiscal and non-fiscal incentives are tightly targeted, performance-based, transparent, and time-bound. We will drive up domestic economic activity by proceeding full speed with our infrastructure program. The infrastructure investments in the country would not have been accelerated without President Duterte's Build, Build, Build program. This has been our main strategy to help Filipinos lift themselves out of poverty. Under President Duterte, infrastructure spending dramatically rose to an average of 5% of GDP from just around 2% during the previous 4 administrations. Clearly, we avoided a lot of trouble. All the strengths that became evident when the challenges were greatest are not due to a stroke of good fortune. This was not luck. This was readiness. They are the results of many years of fiscal discipline, forward-looking policy reforms, and continuing improvement in our administrative systems, especially through the adoption of new digital technologies. We might appear to be behind our neighbors for now, but our recovery will be stronger because of our sound fundamentals. Presently, our vaccination program has been rolling out quite well. This gives us hope that we can now fully reopen our economy. Living and dealing with COVID-19 is a multi-mile marathon, not a 100-yard sprint. Thus, we will not waver in our commitment to ensure that our macroeconomic fundamentals remain strong. We are determined to maintain financial prudence and fiscal strength so we can face the future with a deep war chest. The Duterte administration will not let up on its 0 to 10-point socio-economic agenda. The completion of the reforms under this program will ensure that our economic recovery will be sustainable, inclusive, and resilient. There are more than enough reasons to be hopeful about the next few years. I wish that you could communicate the complete picture of our economic recovery story and the reasons behind our optimism. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Dominguez, for giving the updates on the government's fiscal response. Once again, this Economic Forum Philippines is paving the road to a stronger, more inclusive economy in the post-COVID era is organized by EJAP and Philinvest REIT, currently Cyberzone Properties Incorporated, and brought to us by Global Ferronickel Holdings Incorporated. SM Investments Corporation, SM Supermalls, First Gen Corporation, BDO, and Standard Chartered. Our next speaker will give us the outlook on the Philippine economy as well as updates on the Philippine ID system and the government's vaccine rollout. Fellow EJAP members, let us now have Socio-Economic Planning Secretary Carl Kendrick Chua.
Glad to be here today to share with you the story of the Philippines. Let me just pull up my slide. My presentation today will be about recovering from the pandemic and other shocks. And let me start before anything else. Two economic principles that I typically ask my audience to memorize, dream about, and apply because knowing these two would be very important to understanding everything that is happening to the Philippines and to the world. The first one is nothing is free from heaven, and the second one is everything is a trade-off. Now, in this pandemic, everyone would like to get some support from the government because many jobs have been lost and incomes have gone down. Some people might think that the government can expect all this money to come free from heaven. The reality here is that nothing is free. The government will have to finance it either through present tax collection that everyone pays or future tax collection in the form of borrowing. And so when we talk about, for instance, Bayanihan 3 or any other fiscal measure, we always have to think about where we can responsibly get the financing. The second principle is there's no perfect solution. Everything is a trade-off. This person would like to sleep, would like to work and eat food, and also play video games. But as you know, everything is finite. We have finite time, we have finite clean air, finite clean water. So everything we do, we will have to be making a very important cost-benefit analysis. So when I have to decide whether to give one group something, a subsidy or an allowance or any transfer, I have to be getting it from someone else. So this is a very important balancing act that government plays, especially now in the COVID-19 pandemic. So let me now go to the Philippine development story. So let me begin with this vision for the Philippines, which the Duterte administration put forward at the very start. And it is a very simple two objectives. The first is by 2022, we reduce the poverty rate from 21.6% of the population to 14%, meaning we lift 6 million Filipinos out of poverty. And the second one is by 2022, we reach a GNI per capita of 996 rather, and that will achieve upper middle income country status like countries like Thailand or China today. And working hard towards 2040, which is our long-term vision, we would like to eradicate extreme poverty and become a high-income country, like, for instance, Japan and South Korea today. So this is basically what the whole administration's reform effort is all about. Now, in 2018, when the Philippine Statistics Authority computed the poverty rate, we realized that we have gained already the 6 million lifted out of poverty. So a recalculation of the poverty incidence shows that in 2015, there was 23.5% of the population below the poverty line, which is around 60 pesos per person per day. In 2018, the poverty rate improved to 16.7%. This is the biggest improvement in our history. In other words, we achieved the 6 million 4 years ahead of our target. And despite COVID-19, there is a high chance that we also achieve the 14% target by 2022 or next year. And the reason for a very good performance is we have been very focused on our reform agenda. In 2016, the government proposed a 10-point socioeconomic agenda, where we focus on ensuring macroeconomic policies are sustained, and the latest credit rating from Standard & Poor's, where our credit rating was kept at BBB plus with a stable outlook, is a testament to the good macro fiscal foundation. We pursued tax reform. We were able to do that despite COVID-19 by passing the CREATE law. We passed the Ease of Doing Business law. We spent more than 1 trillion pesos, or 5% of our GDP, on infrastructure. On rural development, we have begun with reforms in the rice sector, and we are going to do more in the other sectors. We have also worked around the issues on land management. On human capital, we have passed the Universal Healthcare Act, which is funding a lot of the COVID-19 response in the health sector. On science and arts, we have passed innovation law, the innovative startup law. We have a space center today, and the Balik Scientist Award or program, wherein our top scientists are incentivized to come back to the Philippines. On social protection, we have the national ID, and I will explain about that later. And we continue to work towards the implementation of the reproductive healthcare law. So this is our 10-point socioeconomic agenda. The green ones are the ones we have substantially achieved, and we are working towards the achievement of the yellow ones. And this is basically what is driving the strong performance of the economy prior to COVID-19. Now let us now talk about recent developments. The reality is that COVID-19 is not going to go away easily. We are on our second major spike in the country. However, the progress has been quite good. So we were able to reduce the number of total average cases by more than half since the peak in late March. Notice also that when the government decided to further reopen the economy last October 12th and during the Christmas season, we did not see a spike. In other words, we are able to manage and ensure that the risks are adequately managed. Unfortunately, because of the long history or experience of quarantine, our economy suffered significantly. So this is a evolution of the quarantine status from the most stringent ECQ, that is the red that you see, to the MECQ, to the GCQ, MGCQ, and no quarantine. So we have been experiencing various levels of quarantine for more than 14 months since middle of March last year. And as you can see, we are again, because of the spike, back in the ECQ and MECQ period in the middle of the first half of this year. And that is affecting a big part of the economy because the NCR and the adjacent regions 3 and 4A have the majority of economic output. And the result is not surprising. The gross domestic product, which was very strong, consistently very strong before the COVID-19 pandemic at more than 6% growth, collapse. And as we reopen the economy, slowly we are able to see improvements from the lowest of -17 to more moderate contraction of -4.2. So in other words, we are seeing quarter-on-quarter positive development, and we hope that after this spike, we will resume the pace of economic recovery. One thing that most people don't understand if I show the GDP is the impact to the people. So this slide basically shows you that last year's quarantine and pandemic cost the economy more than 1 trillion peso worth of wages and income at the household level, or on average 2.8 billion pesos of foregone income at the household level per day. And on average, workers lose 23,000 pesos, or around I believe around 500 US dollars equivalent, but some sectors have been hit much harder because they have totally lost their job. Now, the main difference between last year's quarantine and this year is that we did not shut down 75% of the economy. In fact, we allowed the public transport to operate even during this year's ECQ. So this is mobility data from Google. Notice that from a collapse last year by 80%, this year we are able to keep more or less public transport around 50% of capacity, and that is because of the one seat apart rule. And the NEDA has proposed that we further support workers' mobility by expanding the route frequency and supporting active transport, such as the bike lane network. So unlike last year, I don't think in the second quarter the economy will see any contraction given the change in our risk management strategy. In terms of people actually going to work this year, you will also see that despite the ECQ or MECQ in the last 3 months, more people are going to work. We are just 25% down from the normal period compared to last year when we were 50 or 70 or 80% down. So this shows the kind of recovery that we are expecting in the second quarter. And a big part of this is our policy to restrict children and hence their family from going out. And this is a very big part of economic growth. The consumption of family, which is almost half of all non-essential, meaning outside food consumption. Now, in terms of the impact of the quarantine on jobs, what we can clearly see is that the quarantine status has a very direct impact on employment. In areas outside NCR, that is the blue line, notice that the unemployment rate significantly declined from a peak of 18.5% to as low as 8.2% once those provinces' quarantine status were relaxed to MGCQ. However, in the National Capital Region, notice that for the most part of last year, we have much higher unemployment rate because of the more stringent quarantine status. In other words, the economy actually is strong enough to recover, but we have artificial reasons or policies that prevent the economy from fully functioning. But at least in January, the monthly survey, in the quarterly survey of the labor force, which disaggregates across region, we see improvements in the NCR region. And this is, of course, the reflection of the further opening up of the economy. Now, this chart shows you how much more jobs we have created or full-time equivalent employment we have created over the survey periods. Between January and April of last year, we lost 8.7 million jobs because of the ECQ. Between April and July, we recovered 7.5 million jobs when we relaxed to GCQ level. From July to October last year, we lost 1.5 million jobs, but this is largely because of agriculture, the flooding, and the series of 5 typhoons that we experienced last year. But since October, and we did do the survey monthly starting this year at the national level, we can see significant and gradual progress in job creation. In other words, as of March, we have a net employment creation of 2.8 million from where we started prior to the pandemic. And of course, the quality of job is also important, and that is what we are continuously aspiring for. Another indicator that we monitor quite closely is poverty. This is self-rated hunger data by the social weather stations. The government does not collect high-frequency hunger data, but when one uses the SWS data, you can see that the hunger rate is also highly correlated with the quarantine restriction. In areas outside NCR, the hunger rate did go up to 34%, but when we relaxed the quarantine, it improved to 14.9%. In fact, the hunger rate is much higher in NCR, where 3.2 million people, or almost one-fourth, are hungry due to the GCQ. Of course, in the previous few months, we can see probably a deterioration. That is why we are keen to reopen the economy as soon as the present spike is under control. Now, earlier I did inform everyone that the way we do public policy here, especially around COVID-19, is that we have to do a cost-benefit analysis because there's no perfect solution everything is a trade-off. So let me just give you an idea. This is a chart that you don't need to read line by line. But let me give you an idea of what kind of thinking we go through every time the IATF meets to decide whether we relax the quarantine status or we make it more stringent. So we measure the benefits in terms of how many cases we would prevent, how many COVID deaths we would prevent, and how many severe and critical that will affect our hospital capacity against the cost of a further quarantine in terms of how many more poor people, unemployed people, income loss, and how many more people will die because they do not get the kind of treatment. So again, no need to read this slide, but this is to give you a flavor of what decision-making process we always go through every 2 weeks when we discuss the level of quarantine. So let me now go to the recovery program. The starting point of our recovery is our very strong macroeconomic foundation. Before the crisis, we had strong growth. We were actually about to become upper middle income in 2020 or 2 years ahead of schedule. We managed our inflation very well. We have the strongest ever fiscal position, largely due to the effect of the tax reform. We also had the lowest debt as a share of our GDP. We spent the most on infrastructure. We have the highest credit rating compared to a sea of downgrades around the world. I think maintaining the credit rating at the level of BBB plus is actually a very important achievement. And we achieved the lowest ever unemployment, underemployment, and poverty rate. So this is the foundation. In other words, unlike a war where the productive assets of the economy are destroyed, none of our infrastructure, none of our human resources, and our reforms were affected. The economic performance you see today is due to an artificial policy of restricting economic performance because of excessive risk aversion last year. And that is why we are changing our objective to risk management. So given that, we are proposing the following economic targets: 6 to 7% recovery this year, and a further 7 to 9% recovery in 2022. These are positive growth, allowing us to return to pre-pandemic levels sometime in the latter half of 2022. There are 3 pillars that will govern the recovery. The first is we reopen the economy at the appropriate time, and we allowed an expanded age group to go out with safeguards, including the resumption of face-to-face learning. The second is we have more than 15% of GDP in terms of fiscal, monetary, and financial resources, and we propose to accelerate their implementation. And we have a timely implementation of the vaccination program, which I will discuss in detail. Now, the reality is that this virus is not going to go away. We have to live with it. Last year, many thought that the experience of SARS-1 will be our expected trajectory. Basically 6 months to recover, but this virus is not going to go away easily. So that is why we have to work together to adhere to the public health standards so that we can reopen the economy as soon as we can. So the first recommendation, and this is very important, this is the PDITR strategy. The quarantine restrictions do not solve anything, as you know. They only buy time. What will solve is adherence to the prevent, detect, isolate, treat, recover, and now the vaccination strategy. And 95% of the time, as many of you already know, you can prevent the spread of the virus by simply wearing a mask, washing hands, staying at home except for essential activities, and if we go out to social distance. 99% of the people in the Philippines are not affected by COVID, and 98% are not affected at the household level. In other words, they are able to follow this minimum health standard, and the economy should be allowed to operate to serve their needs. In terms of contact tracing, we are now launching an automatic way of doing contact tracing that will reduce the detect to isolate period from 7 to 5 days and reduce cases by more than half, according to our epidemiological models. We have put in place significant additions to our quarantine, isolation, and bed capacity. In fact, the critical care utilization has gone down from 80% to around 60% and falling in the National Capital Region. So let me now go to the next strategy. We have at least 6 instruments, whether it is on the fiscal, whether it is a spending or a tax break, whether it is on the financial or monetary. The total contribution since last year is 2 trillion pesos or 15% of our gross domestic product. So our strategy here is we have the instruments, but we have to implement them as soon as we can. Bayanihan 1 and 2 are basically health and social protection measures to help affected sectors, create lowers taxes, and gives more targeted and transparent and performance-based incentives. This is about helping banks offload their non-performing loans and assets so that more funds can be lent. Guide is still in Congress, and that addresses solvency issues of strategically important firms. We have a 1.1 trillion peso infrastructure program that is beyond 5% of GDP, which we intend to fully implement. And we have the 2021 national budget, which is geared towards recovery and protection from the pandemic. In terms of our vaccination program, we have reached more than 5 million doses given to the priority A1 to A4 groups. A1, as you know, are the health care workers, A2, senior citizens, A3, people with comorbidities, and now we have decided to open A4 to all workers in the National Capital Region and 8 high-risk provinces. So instead of just focusing on frontline workers, it will be all workers. And by doing that, we can increase the chances of achieving herd immunity sooner rather than later. So A1, 2, 3 continues to be prioritized. However, we are not going to wait for all of them to be inoculated. We are opening now A4 for all workers in the NCR plus 8 high-risk areas. Let me end the main part with a discussion of the national ID. Many of you probably come from countries with national ID. This is one of our priority reforms. It has been more than 25 years in the making, but 3 years ago, we enacted a law that provides for a national ID. And because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have taken precautions to ensure that we minimize the risk of the virus spreading. So step 1 is a house-to-house or online collection of demographics of all citizens and resident aliens. So all of you can actually apply. Step 2 is the capture of biometrics at the registration center and the opening of bank accounts for anyone with no bank accounts, because that is one of the key objectives of the national ID. And step 3 is the delivery of the actual national ID. And we have actually started this in the last 8 months, and we continue to move forward and achieve our 50 to 70 million target by the end of 2021. So our achievements are, I think, quite good, and we are halfway to our 70 million target. In terms of step 1, which is the collection of demographics, we started this last year with more than 10 million registered with demographic data in our system. This year, we had 23 million. All of this, 34 million, we visited them house to house. There are officials bringing tablets to collect the demographic information. And then starting April 30, we have opened the online system. And this is open to everyone presently physically in the Philippines. So I invite you to try it out to input your demographics. And the total so far is 35 million completed with step 1. And we are in almost all the provinces in the country. Now, step 2 is the visit to the registration center and the capture of biometrics. As of the 24th of May, we are 64.7% of our June target. We are present in 23 of 37 provinces. And we have achieved 105% of our May 24 target, or more than 10 million. And we have opened bank accounts for 3.4 million. We have opened bank accounts for 1 million, and the total that will be open once the processing period is completed is around 3.4 million. And again, our target by the end of the year is the 70 million. And COVID-19 and the restrictions are our two hindrances, but we will work hard to complete this by the end of the year. And there are three important use cases for the national ID. The first one is financial inclusion. And we want to achieve 100% financial inclusion at the household level by the end of the year. So all 26 million families, of which currently 70% of them don't have bank accounts, will be able to open a bank account. And we do that by co-locating land bank beside our registration centers. We will also use that for general population vaccine distribution, and we will use that to identify the beneficiaries of our future social protection program to deposit direct to their bank accounts. So let me now end. Many of you, probably in your offices, would like to understand how you can help. So let me propose three more suggestions. Third, after understanding the two economic principles, is to know the facts. Number four is to contribute solutions. Don't stop with the what to do, but also focus on the how to do. And the fifth one is share also the good. You probably have access to social media and your Viber or WhatsApp. I'm sure you receive 1,000 messages. However, if you do not take the extra effort to know the facts, you might be spreading the virus of false information, which is spreading much faster than COVID-19. And nowadays, we need to share only the facts. And you already know many things circulating about the virus, the vaccine, and so on. Knowing the facts actually can improve the way we process information and achieve a more harmonious way of dealing with our present problem. The next one is there are many people who have brilliant ideas, but they read from the same textbooks that we all read. The more important thing for government, especially if you are assisting the government, is not on the what to do, but how to do it. An example is someone told me that we should be giving wage subsidy to the affected workers. But no one of the brilliant people told me how to do it when institutions are worthless, when we don't have bank accounts for all workers or a national ID. So it is important, I think, for everyone to not only contribute to the problem or identifying the problem, but contributing solutions by answering the how to do or how to reform question. And finally is to share the good news. I'm sure you have heard too many bad news, but the typical behavior of people is you complain when you experience something bad. Hardly will you praise, for instance, the chef if you are served good food in the restaurant. But 9 out of 10, I'm sure you will complain if you are served bad food. And I think this is also very important for a more collective way of understanding how we can work together. So with that, thank you very much. I hope this presentation has provided some value to your lives. Have a good day.
Thank you very much, Secretary Chua, for updating us on government's recovery program as we face this global health and economic crisis, as well as updates on the national ID system. At this point, the Department of Budget and Management Chief will brief us on the government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, a virtual round of applause to DBM Secretary Wendell Avisado.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the Economic Journalists Association of the Philippines for giving us this opportunity to discuss the country's fiscal performance amidst these challenging and uncertain times. Indeed, the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic required many governments, including ours, to take exceptional measures in terms of scale and speed to ensure that the adverse effects of the pandemic on health and economy are effectively addressed and mitigated. However, this also highlights the need to balance timely, short-term emergency responses with long-term fiscal sustainability. In this regard, allow me to present to you the recent developments in the expenditure accounts of the government. For 2020, the national government disbursements amounted to 4.23 trillion, higher by 429.7 billion or 11.3% year-on-year, although lower than the 4.34 trillion program by 2.5%. The increase in national government disbursement is due to the implementation of various COVID-19 emergency response and recovery measures of the government, which is reflected in all expense classes. In fact, maintenance and other operating expenses recorded the highest increase of 312.1 billion or 54.5%, which may be attributed to the implementation of the Social Amelioration Program of the Department of Social Welfare and Development, the Department of Labor and Employment's assistance programs for OFWs, formal and informal workers, and other various health emergency measures. Personnel services also grew by 62.9 billion or 5.6% due to the hiring of human resources for health and the provision of special risk allowance and hazard pay, among others. The overall infrastructure disbursements, including infrastructure components of transfers to GOCCs and LGUs, sums up to 869.5 billion, which is higher by 84 billion or 10.7% compared to the revised 785.5 billion program. This is equivalent to a sizable 4.8% of GDP as compared to the 4.2% program for 2020 and the 5.4% realized in 2019. For this year, national government disbursements reached 1.35 trillion as of end April, increasing by 43.4 billion or 3.3% from the same period in 2020. This is mainly due to higher disbursements for infrastructure and equity. Hence, only about 893 billion or 19.8% of the 4.506 trillion program for this year is yet to be obligated by the government agencies for the rest of the year. Government spending is also expected to accelerate further given the recent release of allotments amounting to 124.3 billion for the month of May. Over the medium term, the fiscal program will remain supportive of the country's recovery measures amidst the COVID-19 pandemic while also ensuring long-term sustainability. The revenue program for this year is maintained at 2.88 trillion or 14.5% of GDP, but is expected to increase to 3.29 trillion or 14.9% of GDP by next year as the economy gradually recovers. Revenue collections are also assumed to grow further grow over the medium term at 3.59 trillion or 14.8% of GDP in fiscal year 2023 and at 4 trillion or 15.1% of GDP in fiscal year 2024. Estimates for the fiscal year 2021 disbursement program are revised upwards from 4.66 trillion to 4.74 trillion or 23.9% of GDP due to the continuing implementation of Bayanihan 2 programs and the ongoing procurement of COVID-19 vaccines, among others. Disbursements are also expected to gradually increase in the following years, reaching 4.95 trillion or 22.4% of GDP in 2022, 5.11 trillion or 21.1% in 2023, and 5.4 trillion or 20.3% in 2024. The government will continue to adopt a fiscal consolidation strategy and ensure financial sustainability by gradually bringing the deficit back to pre-COVID-19 levels over the medium term. For this year, the deficit program is expected to increase to 9.3% of GDP in 2021, mainly accounting for the extended validity of Fiscal Year 2020 General Appropriations Act, the ongoing implementation of the Bayanihan 2 Law, and other COVID-19 measures such as the procurement and delivery of COVID-19 vaccines. The deficit will then be gradually lowered to 7.5% of GDP in 2022 and further decrease to pre-COVID-19 levels at 6.3% of GDP in 2023 and 5.3% of GDP in 2024. To effectively respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, the Philippine government is currently implementing programs, projects, and activities under the Fiscal Year 2021 National Budget and the Bayanihan to Recover as One Act. The Fiscal Year 2021 budget is the government's main fiscal stimulus for economic recovery. Consistent with the government's fiscal program, the Fiscal Year 2021 National Budget amounts to 4.506 trillion and is equivalent to 22.7% of the projected nominal GDP for the year. This is carefully crafted to help the country reset, rebound, and recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. Of the 4.506 trillion budget for fiscal year 2021, about 961.22 billion worth of government programs, activities, and projects are tagged as directly and indirectly responsive to the COVID-19 pandemic. This is distributed across different government agencies to support major response programs, including the DOH medical assistance to indigent patients, DA's or Department of Agriculture's Plant Program, DOLE's Livelihood and Emergency Employment Program, and the procurement of the COVID-19 vaccines. The infrastructure projects of DPWH and DOTR are also considered as contributory to addressing the pandemic, as these are expected to establish a more solid foundation for the country's economic recovery due to their multiplier effect on employment and development of community-based micro and small enterprises. As of May 31, 2021, out of the 387.17 billion allotment released for COVID-19 interventions under Bayanihan 1, about 360.42 billion or 93.9% has already been obligated, and 342.4 billion or 95% has been disbursed. Meanwhile, 200.12 billion has been released for Bayanihan 2, of which obligations amounted to 172.28 billion or 86.9% and disbursements at 135.81 billion or 78.83%. About 310.1 billion was charged against food savings generated from discontinued programs, activities, and projects pursuant to Section 4B of the Bayanihan 1 and Section 11B of the Bayanihan 2. This effectively implies the balance between being prudent and responsible in managing the country's fiscal position while ensuring speedy and timely implementation of COVID-19 emergency measures. Moreover, about 6.46 billion was also released, of which 4.23 billion was obligated and 3.58 billion was disbursed during the interim period between the Bayanihan 1, which expired in June 2020, and before Bayanihan 2, which came into effect in September of 2020. This was charged against regular funds in the absence of an enabling appropriations law. Lastly, about 66.75 billion was released to the Department of Health for the procurement of COVID-19 vaccines and was charged from the fiscal year 2021 DOH regular fund and from unprogrammed appropriations. In total, allotments amounting to 73.21 billion were released outside of the Bayanihan laws. Overall, about 660.5 billion was released by DBM to various agencies and departments for their respective COVID-19 response program. Of this amount, a total of 542.64 billion is already obligated, or 82.2%, and about 486.71 billion, or 89.8%, was disbursed by the agencies. Our efforts to effectively address the impact of the health crisis will continue with the preparation of the 2022 National Expenditure Program. Consistent with the macroeconomic assumptions and foregoing fiscal targets, the fiscal year 2022 cash budget is estimated to be at 5.024 trillion, equivalent to 22.8% of the projected nominal GDP for the year. The proposed budget for 2022 marks an 11.5% increase from the 4.506 trillion budget for 2021. The DBM is awaiting the submission of fiscal year 2022 agency budget proposal for Tier 1 forward estimates and Tier 2 new spending from several departments and agencies. For Tier 2 programs and projects, the following strategic programs should be prioritized for funding given the very limited fiscal space due to the adverse effect of the pandemic. Number one is the vaccination program, the booster shots. Number two, national assistance to, or national government assistance to disadvantaged local government units, referring to the Growth Equity Fund. Three is the establishment of the Virology, Science and Technology Institute of the Philippines. Four, the family planning. Five, nutrition. Six, the national IV and interagency integration. And seven, other priority expenditures. In closing, dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic requires tremendous efforts from the private sector and the government. Hence, our mission from this day forward is to address the adverse effects of the pandemic while continuing to incorporate open government principles in our COVID-19 response. Trust that we will continue to engage with the business sector and the EJAP for that matter, our legislature and our citizens in our drive to enhance the country's fiscal strategies. Thank you very much, and God bless us all.
Thank you, Secretary Abisado, especially for informing us on how the government utilized its budget for its COVID-19 response. So, after hearing our top economic managers, let us now hear from the private sector. To talk about how conglomerates are weathering the pandemic, let us welcome Josephine Gotianon Yap, President and CEO of Philinvest Development Corporation and Philinvest Land Incorporated.
Good morning to the leadership of EJAP and its members. Thank you for bringing together the movers of the Philippine economy. Your role as business journalists is more valuable now than ever before. Amidst the confusion and despair brought about by the COVID crisis, your work serves as a beacon. Beyond just providing clarity, a message of hope through your stories can uplift business and society. Last week, I had the opportunity to be interviewed by a business reporter and was asked a question on what keeps me up at night. I was stumped but my truthful answer was this. The pandemic was the mother of all crises, and since I have survived the pandemic, nothing else should be able to keep me up at night. My generation are veterans of crisis. If not for this pandemic, which snuck up on us, this would have been our first crisis-free decade in business. Our generation's first initiation into business was the double whammy dollar moratorium coupled with a political crisis triggered by the Aquino assassination in the mid-80s. The 90s began with an economic fallout from the series of attempted military coups. Our financial acumen was further developed from lessons learned during the prolonged Asian crisis and the Great Recession of 2008. All these events shaped our frame of mind when confronted with the annus horribilis of 2020. Indeed, 2020 turned out to be the big test. It tested our mettle as individuals, our agility as an organization, our resolve as a sustainable corporation, our empathy as members of society, and our resilience as a country. I am proud of how the various members of the Philinvest Group responded to this defining moment. I was commuting regularly to Singapore during the first quarter of last year. Some of you may not know that my husband is the Philippine ambassador to Singapore. My visit then was when Singapore was experiencing its first wave and had more COVID cases than Manila. So it gave me an early insight into COVID-19. Once the pandemic hit Manila, Philinvest was ready and we immediately formed crisis mitigation teams, which range from digitization, cash flow management, sanitation and testing protocols, among others. This allowed us to seamlessly continue our operations and support our customers in Philinvest land communities, East West Bank branches, and the electric cooperatives in Mindanao. My first assessment of this crisis was that it differed because we could not isolate nor protect the business purely through financial measures. The widespread impact of public health was so intertwined with the economy, and the pandemic's global ramification, which affected our overseas customers, made it even more daunting. As such, we would only survive if we were able to manage the public health issue first and foremost. Many in the private sector came to the same conclusion and reached out to participate in a concerted effort through public and private partnerships. It was truly the fastest and most impressive PPP of any administration. Philinvest and the Gotianon Foundation set aside a 100 million war chest for this effort. I recall cold calling a cabinet secretary and offering to provide a dashboard and data warehouse for COVID cases. I was very uncomfortable that we didn't have the same data feed that I got used to reading daily provided by the Singapore Ministry of Health. The Philinvest City Foundation offered to provide it at no expense to the government. Given the urgency of the situation, several agencies started working with our designated data science and analytics provider, Thinking Machine. In less than 2 weeks, each COVID-19 dashboard and data warehouse was up by mid-April 2020. But the depth of the problem was much deeper, since our healthcare infrastructure has been neglected by many administrations over the years. There was no central reporting system in place, and we continued to work to piece together data from various ad hoc reporting systems. While there was much to be improved in terms of timeliness and accuracy of the data, We had to adapt in an agile fashion, work with what was available, and continue to improve it along the way. Our PhilInvest IT team found themselves developing a data repository system which proved to be the most effective in capturing laboratory data. The substance of the data was always sufficient for strategy and decision making, but has continued to be improved over time. Perfection would have been the enemy of progress. We are thankful that despite the pandemic, the PhilInvest Group performed relatively well in 2020. Despite a reduction in our net income, we emerged among the top 10 conglomerates in terms of profitability. We were top 6 to be exact. This was a result not of pandemic reactors, but of decisions made many years ago, lessons learned from previous crises. It was a combination of diversification strategies and financial prudence. We balanced the cyclical and defensive segments of our businesses, and we managed our leverage and spread out our maturities. We also learned that because we lived up to our commitments to our banks and bond investors during the Asian crisis, they in turn continued to support us in future crises. During these times, setting aside a cash hoard is imperative. FDC went about raising $200 million bond and FLI an $8 billion local bond issue at favorable rate as evidence of investors' continued trust in the group. In addition, a whole new set of lessons and insights helped PhilInvest thrive during the pandemic. First was the need for constant learning and agility combined. In a crisis where the enemy is not only invisible but unfamiliar, you need to be one step ahead. The right knowledge allows you to develop your plans and adjust those plans quickly when new information comes to light. Our business plans have taken a shorter and more agile approach in anticipation of possible curveballs. While we have been more selective in new property launches, we have accelerated the new facet of our business on environmentally sustainable investments, such as recycled water, desalination, solar rooftops, and district cooling with our partners NG and Hitachi. On the banking side, East West, out of prudence, set aside 2.4 times their previous year's allowances to ensure financial health and strength in anticipation of possible credit losses. Our most hard-hit industry, hospitality, had to reinvent itself to be relevant during COVID times. It created a bubble environment that supported the PBA last year and the FIBA at present. Second is the need for empathy. With personal health at risk, it is no longer purely business. Workplace and customer safety became our first and basic responsibility. At the height of the first wave, we kept in mind the mental health of our employees by rolling out e-learning, leadership training, and even a rosary brigade. The PhilInvest also committed to 100,000 doses of vaccine. Our PhilInvest land property management teams adjusted to the new needs of our homeowners, including health and sanitation screening and delivery market. Early in the pandemic, we were approached by the RITM frontliners for living quarters, and we fixed up the Palms Country Club for them. We were surprised by the overwhelming public approval from social media, as somehow the letter we wrote informing the members went viral. More establishments opened their doors to the healthcare workers going forward. It is this empathy that made us offer the use of the PhilInvest tent as a quarantine center without being asked, and to allow its further expansion. Vaccination rollout is also being done in our parking building, with food support for the inoculators. Third is understanding accelerated transformation. This starts with the transformation of mindsets internally and among our leaders. We were gladly relieved that our early investments in IT infrastructure provided the foundation to communicate with our customers and allow our East West Bank and Philinvest Land teams to work from home. We are now even more convinced that we need to move faster toward digital transformation and preparing not only for today's customers, but also for the customer of tomorrow. We accelerated our sustainability goal of financial inclusion. During the pandemic, East West launched Como, the very first exclusively digital banking service approved by the BSP for a local universal bank. FDEV, our digital arm, launched the first SEC-approved crowdfunding license for a digital platform to finance SMEs. The crisis likewise saw the interest of investors looking for higher-yielding instruments than savings and time deposits. By the third quarter of this year, Philinvest Land will enter the REIT market through its office leasing subsidiary to be renamed Philinvest REIT Corp. This first investment portfolio is composed of 17 Grade A buildings, carefully handpicked for the quality and diversity of its multinational tenants. Over 300,000 square meters of principally office spaces are mostly located in 18.7-hectare Northgate Cyber Zone, one of the first PESA-accredited IT parks in Philinvest City, Muntinlupa. We also have one tower in PESA-accredited Cebu Cyber Zone in Cebu City. PhilREIT focuses on the resilient BPO sector. Multinational BPO companies account for 88.4% of the occupied gross leasable area, while POGO tenants occupy only 2.8%. The remaining 9% are non-BPO offices and some retail tenants as of the first quarter of 2021. At the height of the pandemic, we still saw some e-payment and European outsourcing players sign up for expansion space. PhilREIT is distinguished by its sustainability. Philinvest City, where 16 of the buildings are located, received the LEED version 4 Gold for Neighborhood Development certification, becoming the first central business district in the Philippines to earn such recognition. Philinvest City also has an Eco Loop, the Philippines' first integrated electric power 24/7 public transport system. Moreover, the office buildings within Northgate Cyber Zone are served by the country's largest district cooling system, which reduces carbon emissions and energy consumption. We are looking forward to listing PhilREIT because we believe that this will unlock the value of our office leasing business. Philinvest has an extensive land bank of 400 hectares of prime CBD and industrial land in NCR, Metro Clark, and Metro Cebu to provide further capacity to grow. As with the other REIT companies before us, we're hopeful that as we shore up capital to fund our investment portfolio, we are also fueling hope for a quicker bounce back for the Philippine economy. In closing, this crisis of global scale is a sign of things to come, the coming of a new emerging market Asian century. It highlighted that those emerging countries with access to less scientific and financial resources could surpass even those of more developed economies in such a critical juncture. That there is a place for societies with greater social discipline and concern for the common good to create a more sustainable world. I learned the importance of unity and social responsibility in times of crisis. I feel elated when citizens of other countries express to me their admiration for the Philippine private sector involvement. I learned that finding ways to help and participate was more effective and useful to society. Yes, there will always be time later for stating what could have been done better in hindsight. But in a pandemic, working together, helping each other, and moving in a timely manner are what will help us all sleep better at night. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Josephine Gotianon Yap, President and CEO of Philinvest Development Corporation and Philinvest Land Incorporated. So now prepare your questions, fellow EJAP members, as we begin the Q&A. You may send your questions on our Zoom meeting chat box. At this point, let me introduce the moderator for the open forum, Ms. Karen Lema of Reuters.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? No?
Yes, Karen, we can hear
Can you
you.
hear me? You can.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Hi, good morning, everybody. And thank you once again to our speakers this morning. And special thanks to Secretary Chua, Ms. Gotianon Yap, and Finance Undersecretary Hilda Tran for agreeing to stay with us a little longer and join us in our Q&A forum. Just a few reminders before we kick off. For those of you who wanted to ask questions, I'd appreciate if you could just state your name in the chat box so I can call you, or if you prefer to type your questions, you may do so, and I'd be more than happy to read the questions for you. So while you're doing that, I think we can kick off with our first question coming from Miss Eileen Mencias. Oh, Eileen's question is for the central bank governor, but I understand that the governor could not join us for our Q&A session. Is there somebody from the central bank who can respond? Chris? Is there a representative from the central bank? Let me just check. Oh, Eileen, I'm sorry, there's nobody who could respond to your question. So we don't have a central bank representative in the panel. So who would like to ask the next question? While you're preparing your questions, oh, there's one I have. Let me read this for you. The question is from Gerard, and his question is addressed to the members of the panel. He says he would like to know how the speakers envision the economic structure of the Philippines post-pandemic. Will it be the same economy as it was pre-pandemic? For example, based on the GDP breakdown, the Philippine economy is driven by low value added service-oriented activities rather than high value adding manufacturing activities that require higher education. As correctly mentioned by Secretary Chua, the quality of jobs and not merely the quantity of jobs. As an example is the transformative effect of the BPO sector. So, granted the changes would happen overnight, do you see a similar change in behavior for the country's economic structure, or will the economy's engine be the same post-pandemic? Anybody from the panel would like to start? Maybe Secretary Carl, and then maybe Secretary Yusek Hill would like to take that. Is Secretary Carl here? Ah, there. Hi, Secretary. We'd like to answer the question, Secretary Carl. You're on mute, sir.
Thank you, Karen. I was trying to unmute and start the video, but it doesn't allow me for many minutes. So apologies for the wait. And apologies also to the EJAP for missing the first part. I hope the video presentation was adequate. This week is the start of school of my son, so my apologies. On the question, uh, even before the pandemic, we have been already slated for the next level of development, which is upper middle income class country. And we have seen our poverty incidence decline significantly before the pandemic. And we expect to continue that trajectory after we have resolved the initial challenges of this pandemic. So we are looking at resuming our growth trajectory by the second half of 2022. Uh, there will be several changes, and we have instituted several reforms, and we have proposed several more reforms to help us transition into a new economy that is characterized by innovation, that is characterized by a stronger sense of addressing the issues of climate change. We also want to address our remaining infrastructure gap, and we also want to address things like regional inequity. Alongside those, the COVID-19 pandemic is going to accelerate our shift to a digital economy. And since last year when I started, we have pushed the national ID strongly. And as of a few days ago, I understand 36 million Filipinos have started the first step of registering for a national ID. And we are working with the central bank and the land bank to ensure 100% financial inclusion at the family level by the end of the year, because every time a low income family with no bank account opens a national ID account, he is able to open a land bank account. So these are some of the transformation that we expect to see in the coming years. Thank you.
Music Hill. Sure, you're on mute.
I think Yusakil is
Yeah,
first also.
Yeah, we expect that the economy will return to its former shape once we get rid of the virus. And of course, we expect tourism to go because there's demand for it. And all but we have discovered, this is the change, we have discovered the convenience of digital technology. There will be more online transactions, more online meetings, like what we are doing now, more online payments, more digital platforms, and we will be shifting from one platform to the other with ease. So we have we have discovered actually the convenience of digital technology, and that will be the new normal after this virus. That's all. Thank you.
That's completely true, Yusek Hill. I myself resisted using digital payments in the past, but the pandemic left me with no choice, and now I'm quite satisfied with all the services that's being offered. So
yeah, actually, I am also surprised.
Yes.
Now, 99.5% of our tax collections are now done online. That's something I did not expect will happen.
Very, very convenient. Yeah. Our next question is for Ms. Gutianon Yap. Hi, ma'am. Our question comes from Ms. Doris Dumlao of Philippine Daily Inquirer. She asks if you could please elaborate on the prospective dividends to be offered by Philinvest REIT.
Yes. The dividend will be definitely a competitive dividend rate, similar to the other REITs that are in the around the mid 5% area, and we're looking at dividending out 100% of the NOI. So I believe there was another question as well talking about the land. So we are the land will be 75-year lease. That is for the properties that are in the REIT. And the field REIT will be the financial platform for the commercial assets of the group. So currently, in addition to the initial portfolio, we have another 315,000 of office portfolio that will be infused when it has attained the investment criteria of the REIT guidelines. And in addition to that, we have many other assets that are retail that are still under construction as well as industrial warehousing that we're working on, given the depth and the extensive land bank that we have.
Do you have a follow-up, Doris? Oh, she has. Ma'am, she's asking, what is the percent of Philinvest group-wide employees who are willing to be vaccinated? Do you offer incentives for them to get vaccinated?
I think the first thing we did was we had a very extensive campaign. So we constantly have campaign that we bring out. So I believe the last time I saw was about 60%. But we noticed as well that as more people got vaccinated, more and more of them started coming up and asking for vaccination. And I think we're confident we can get a very good number.
It's really, really good to know, ma'am. Another question from Miss Wendy Noble. I think this is addressed to Secretary Carl. A Moody's report yesterday categorized the Philippines among emerging sovereigns that have well-targeted social safety net programs. It, however, noted low spending for these programs, which limits the effects of reducing poverty and income inequality. What has COVID-19 taught us so far about crafting social safety net programs, and how do you plan to further expand or improve these programs moving forward?
Well, thank you very much for the question, Wendy. First of all, we have been trying out social protection programs for more than a decade. The first time we piloted the conditional cash transfer program was in 2008. And over the years, we have expanded that. And I understand DSWD has done 3 census already of the low-income families, which is called the Listahanan. I think the latest is Listahanan 3. And from there, we have gradually improved the targeting of our poor people through the conditional cash transfer, or the 4Ps, which is now law. We also have the CBMS as law, the community-based monitoring system. However, our delivery of social services is still hampered by the lack of a centralized means of distributing cash transfer. For instance, instead of manually by cash, we should be doing it through the banks. When we gave the SAP last year, in less than a few hours, we were able to transfer 4 million, the subsidy to 4 million people who already had the CCT bank account. However, for the rest of the population, we had difficulty. That is why we are moving forward vigorously with the national ID. And as I mentioned, our goal by the end of the year is to register at least 50 million Filipinos to the national ID, and to ensure that all 18 million low-income families with no bank accounts are given the chance to open one. As of a few days ago, I think some 3 million already 3 million families were able to open a bank account or online or digital payment system with the land bank. So we will pursue this for the rest of the year so that we can improve our targeting of safety net programs and the delivery, and accelerate the way we distribute to reduce poverty and inequality. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Carl. Related to digital payments is a question addressed to Ms. Gutierrez Yap. Ma'am, the question is from Lee Chipongian of Manila Bulletin. She asks, is the bank preparing to apply for a digital bank license, and are there plans to spin off Como as your fully operating digital bank?
No decision has been made as of now as far as that concerned. I think currently, the digital banking service being done by Como is quite sufficient at this point in time.
Thank you, ma'am. And while I have you, another question for you, ma'am, is from Ms. Jen Austria of Manila Standard. She asks, can you expound on Philinvest REIT's reinvestment plan? Where will the company use the proceeds from the IPO? Is FDC interested in Sangli Airport? And will you partner with JG Summit again if ever you decide to bid for the airport project?
So let me do the last questions first. Yes, we will always, definitely, our partnership with JG Summit has been good, and we would be more than willing to partner with them. Then the, what was the other question again? Sorry.
The other question, ma'am, is, just give me a second, about the REIT's reinvestment plan. Where will the company use the
yes, the REIT reinvestment strategy, there are mainly three major criteria for strategy. One is that it has to be a grade A commercial property, and we're looking at the aside from the office portfolio, which is the main focus, we're also looking at opportunistic assets such as retail and hospitality. Then secondly, we're also, it has to be with very prime commercial clients, very prime multinational BPOs is the main focus as well of the investment strategy for the office portfolio. And so those are those, and also this has to be very well located. Like anything in property, location is most critical. So it has to be very well located in prime CBDs as well as with a strong growth and accessibility to the workforce.
Thank you, ma'am. We have loads of questions in the chat group. I'll try to read as much as I can. Another question for Yusik Hill. Yusik Hill, the question comes from Ms. Chris Crismundo of PNA. She asks, please provide us with an update on the privatization of mines. How much can the government raise from this? Will this be enough to finance the bigger budget deficits in the next couple of years? And speaking of funding, she also asked, what tax measures can you suggest for the next administration in order to sustain the economy's growth in the coming years?
What was that? Privatization of?
The status, sir, of privatization of mines. She's asking how much can the government raise from this undertaking, and will that be enough to finance the wider budget deficit in the next couple of years?
Privatization always helps in bridging the budget deficit. But privatization is not within my area, so I don't know. I'll have to check with the one in charge. That's Yusek Karen Singson. If you have her email, ask it from her. I also try to ask that one, privatization of mines. What's the other question? It's
on the tax measures, sirs. What tax measures?
We have a long list of new tax measures, which we hope the next administration will look at. As you know, it takes a year at least for even an attractive tax measure to pass. So if you start now, you might not finish. So we are now putting, as you know, every time a new administration comes in, we put up a list of all the fiscal measures that we hope they will look at and think about carefully. We are preparing that list right now, and once the new administration comes in, you will know what those are. But most of these are really the relative to tax sector, relatively not untaxed sectors, like digital transactions. We should look at that more carefully.
Thank you, Yusek. The subject of climate change was discussed this morning. So a question related to that comes from Ms. Denise Rivera of Philippine Star, and the question is addressed to Ms. Gutiano Yap. Ma'am, she asks, as the Department of Energy shun future coal plant developments, the country is pursuing an energy transition toward the development of renewable energy sources. What will be Philinvest Group's role in this?
Yes, we definitely are pursuing renewable energy projects. We have about 56 megawatts of renewable energy projects that we are running after, and as well as we are also doing solar rooftop projects for major industrial clients. So we have about, I think, 4.3 megawatts of solar rooftop projects that are currently being done. So definitely, as solar power becomes much more competitive now, and later on when battery also becomes more viable, and you can switch to base load power being provided by solar with the combination of battery. That's definitely something that we will be pursuing and taking a look at.
Thank you, ma'am. A question for Secretary Carl. The question is from Ms. Eileen Mencia. She asks, in your briefings, you always say that nothing is free from heaven and that everything is a trade-off. And so what is the trade-off with China?
I don't understand the question.
Would you like to explain your question, Eileen? You can unmute yourself. She has no mic. I'll wait for you to type to elaborate your question. But if you don't mind, Secretary Carl, just related to that question, since China was mentioned, there was a lot of discussion about infrastructure projects during the forum. During the G7 summit, Secretary, they announced this initiative called Build Back Better World initiative. And I was wondering if I could get your reaction to that as well, if this is something that you welcome. Some people see this as the G7's way to counter the growing influence of China by offering an infrastructure plan that could rival the Belt and Road Initiative. So is this something that the Philippines welcome, or are you skeptical because of the conditions that were attached to the previous development projects in the past?
Well, okay, let me address the question along these lines. Number one, the fact is we have a big gap in infrastructure, which we have started to fill up vigorously in the past 5 years, and we will continue to do so. And infrastructure is a key to our future growth and development. And we need smarter infrastructure, both transportation, communication, including other sectors like water. Number two, we have a long experience of dealing with all types of support, whether it is multilateral, bilateral, whether it is funded by our own budget, or even public-private partnership. So other countries, whether it is Japan, China, Korea, Europe, or the US, have very good experience in infrastructure. So we are open to learning from them and tapping the best design and innovative infrastructure to help our own economy. There are two things that we always watch in the NEDA ICC. Number one, is the infrastructure value for money? Is it the best way to avail of that infrastructure? And will it not add to future costs or contingent liabilities? Number two, is it really an infrastructure for the people, where the comfort and benefit of the people? If these are going to be available, then we would, of course, welcome these ideas. And we will do our due diligence to ensure that they will not add to any future cost or liability, and really benefit the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Carl. Another question for you. This is related to the meat prices. How are we planning to increase the chances of meat prices stabilizing in the medium term, other than the lowering of tariffs?
Well, the problem in the pork supply is there is a major outbreak of the African swine fever. That is why a lot of heads have died or have been culled. And there is no way to meet the demand if we do not temporarily open up the market to imported pork products. At the same time, the Department of Agriculture is working hard to repopulate and ensure a long-term viability of the sector. That is how we will address. From in the short term, we need to open up the market to some importation. The tariff is not zero, so there is some way to balance both the interests of the producers and consumers. The minimum access volume is not very high or not very low. It is a middle ground that was agreed with the legislators. And we are seeing the prices slowly falling and the importation rising. And this is what we need to do in the next few months. Now, in the medium to long term, it's really about improving our bio safety. It is improving our border control so that we do not import any more diseases. And it's also improving the productivity of the hog raisers so that they can be able to provide food at more competitive prices. So that is our strategy. Thank you.
Thank you to Secretary Carl. For Yusek Hill, a question about, I'm not sure if this is something you can ask because you said the privatization question should probably be directed to another official, but the question is whether you could give an update on the privatization of PAGCOR and PCSO operations. How much can the government raise from this? And another question for you, sir. Which tax policies can apply to those who are engaged in cryptocurrencies? Does the government plan to create a specific tax for these transactions? And if I may take advantage, Yusek Hill also, what are the plans of the government when it comes to carbon taxes? Very timely question. Is this one of the tax measures that the Duterte administration planned to recommend to its successor?
Actually, there was a plan to privatize PAGCOR way back, but it did not prosper. I think we also like the receiving annual dividends from PAGCOR. That's the reason why it did not prosper. But it would have been a very good revenue. It would have generated significant amount of revenues. It's built in billions of pesos. But I think we also like the receiving annual dividends from PAGCOR, which is the reason why it was retained as a GOCC. What's the other question again? Or a specific tax?
Yes, sir. On the carbon tax and tax on cryptocurrencies.
Yeah, we are looking at that. Cryptocurrency, it would depend on how we look at cryptocurrency. If the Banco Central would recognize it as an asset that should be sold, exchanged, and transferred in the Philippines, then we can look at a proper way to tax it. Actually, our tax system is such that it's generic. So if you look at, if you read the tax code, for instance, it says any person who in the course of trade or business sells, barters, exchanges, leases goods or properties, renders services, or any person who imports goods for sale should be subject to VAT. So the transaction would already be subject to VAT. On the other hand, it also says, look at section 24 and 27, any income, an income tax is hereby levied, imposed on any taxable income from all sources within and without the Philippines by every individual citizen. And that would include juridical citizens like corporations, which is under section 27. So our tax system really is very generic. So almost any invention that you could make in the future, new products, digital chicken or bionic pork, for instance, could be subject under this under our tax system, existing tax system.
Thanks, Yusik Hill. Another question for Ms. Gutiano Nyap, a follow-up question from Doris, ma'am, about the vaccination. She's asking whether there are incentives offered to Philinvest employees to encourage vaccination. I think we've seen a lot of examples of this, ma'am, like, day off, house and lot, and in other countries, a cow in exchange for vaccines. So how about Philinvest?
Yeah. I think we felt we didn't have to resort to that. We provided the vaccine for free, and then I think the constant education of the importance of vaccine, I think it's enough for our people to be encouraged to be vaccinated.
Thank you, ma'am. Another pandemic-related question for Ms. Gutiano Nyap comes from Mr. Warren de Guzman of ABS-CBN. He asks, what is your view of the work from home model, and how will this impact your development plans and project mix moving forward?
Yes, we believe that while work from home has worked for some companies, it's not suited for every company, especially the bigger BPOs, because there are always issues like stable connectivity, data security, and also productivity management, and as well as the camaraderie in the workplace that improves on morale and keeping the morale and the spirit high. So we believe that maybe for the smaller companies, they probably can do that, but not the bigger ones. Of course, you all have experiences of listening to the dog or the baby cry or bark at the back, right, during a webinar or a meeting.
Yes, exactly. But I think I'm also curious, what does the future of the office and workspaces hold? We've seen a lot of articles about it, ma'am, how maybe offices are shrinking and you see a lot of people using shared offices. Is this something that Philinvest, is also looking at?
Yes, I think many companies will probably adopt a hybrid model. You know, uh,
Yeah.
yeah, partially going, but and that happened naman in the past, where you see first it's nothing new for the salespeople. They only keep certain segments, and then people come in, right? So so I think that's something that's a trend that we are mindful of.
Mhm. Thank you, ma'am. But another question for you, ma'am, is related to renewable energy. Question is from Jordine. She asked, what is Philinvest's RE target? How much is the allotted budget for RE projects in the pipeline? And related to that is a question from Danessa. She's also asking if you could give a breakdown on what RE technology or technologies the 56 megawatt are, and what stage of these developments are these? Any target on construction completion?
Yes, the 56 megawatt is solar farms, and they're in different stages at present. And so I think that we will make a separate announcement for each of the projects when at the different points in time, right? And as far as the RE budget is concerned, I cannot give a figure per se, because we are in partnership with a lot of the bigger players like NG. So I think our budgets are actually quite flexible based on being able to get certain projects and or offtake agreements.
Thank you, thank you, ma'am. And thank you again to our panelists for being so patient and accommodating all our questions. There's still a lot. I'll try to squeeze in everything as much as we can. Yusik Hill, a question for you from Lee. Do you have a foreign debt ceiling? She asked because the central bank used to have a foreign borrowing cap and they've removed it in 2016. Do you have a foreign debt ceiling, sir? I think yes.
Okay. Oh yes, there's a limit to public sector borrowing But for the private sector, I think it depends upon the financials of the project that they're proposing. So what's the problem with this? It's we have always been very careful in not avoid in not exceeding the level of foreign borrowing that can be allowed. Actually, the level of foreign borrowing should be related to how big your economy is. So it's always a question of debt over GDP. So as long as that one is within 60 to 70%, you're still okay, according to the IMF. If you go beyond that, then your creditors will start punishing you with higher rates. So we are very careful not to push too much the level of borrowing that we incur.
Thank you, Yusikil. A question for both Yusikil and Secretary Carl. This is from Warren de Guzman. He asks, the central bank governor warned of economic scarring from the pandemic, and analysts have projected a K-shaped recovery. Does NER have a forecast of the number of individuals, families, MSMEs that are vulnerable to economic scarring and are in danger of being left behind in a K-shaped recovery?
Well, first of all, if we don't manage the risk and gradually open up, then everyone is affected. And there are some sectors, especially in category 4, basically those in the leisure or catering to children or in tourism, that will be more affected. The experience of other countries show that we can strike a better balance so that we can allow the far majority of people with lower risk to continue their economic activities. So that is the first. The second is we are ramping up our vaccination program. And that is key also to safely opening the economy further. And number 3, we continue to provide support in terms of fiscal spending or lower taxes or monetary or financial support through the banking system to address the needs of small businesses and their workers who have been affected. But no matter how much stimulus or money you give, if you artificially prevent the economy from operating, then there's no way to get out. So stimulus actually works if the economy is allowed to operate, so that consumer demand can return, and the additional stimulus can be used to further help the businesses. But if you close the economy or artificially don't allow it to operate or prevent half of the economy, including families and their children, from going out, then no matter what money you put or pump prime, they will not be able to fully help. So that is why we have to look at this recovery from a bigger perspective. So first, again, to summarize, we manage the risk and open up as many of the sectors as safely as we can. Number 2, we use prudently our resources to target and help those most affected. And number 3, we accelerate the vaccination. And this will help us achieve a positive growth this year and next year. Thank you.
Yusikil?
Actually, the Filipino is very innovative. If you impose a lockdown and this leads to the closure of the formal sector, they will go to the informal sector and start setting up informal businesses. And that's why the central bank, in a report cited before the end of the year last year, there was a big increase in MSME lending. So when they cannot go to work in the formal sector, they set up informal businesses, small businesses, which could grow to become formal businesses after this pandemic.
Thank you, Yusek. The next couple of questions, I think this is quite you'll probably already anticipated some of these questions with the presidential election just almost less than a year away. So question is for Secretary Carl. How would election spending affect the recovery of the Philippine economy this year and next year? How much can it contribute to GDP growth? And related to that, how important do you think that those who will win in the polls are allies of the Duterte administration, insofar as its impact on growth, continuity is concerned?
Yeah, on the first question, there is a push and pull effect during an election year. So what contributes to growth are typically consumption spending that may be related to the elections. However, we also cannot start new projects during the election period. So that is the counter effect. Now, what is the net effect? Normally, in the past, we have seen some positive contribution on the net. And there have been studies by World Bank that has shown that. Now, this year and next year are still COVID years. So we are unable to make a more accurate assessment. So I'm just giving you the economics around election years. On the second question, I think that is better addressed by the political analyst. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary. Related to the economic growth outlook, is a question about infrastructure, Secretary Carl. Of the over 4,000 projects in the PIP, which includes the 112 flagship projects, how many have been completed and how many can still be completed by 2022? Will we be able to attain the 7 to 8 trillion worth infrastructure spending by next year? Why or why not? And related to growth outlook, Secretary, another question is the government's outlook on the country's trade performance in the coming months, especially in light of the container crisis. How will this affect economic growth for the rest of the year?
Okay, let me start by saying that we have a dynamic process in the Philippine investment programming. So every year we review this and we submit to DBM a 3-year rolling infrastructure project. Last year, this year, and next year are more challenging because of COVID, because of the difficulties of getting some projects started or maintaining their momentum given the pandemic and the quarantines. The far majority of projects are small scale or locally funded that are provided funding in the budget annually. And this year and next year, we are funding at least 1 trillion pesos worth. Now, there are 112 big ticket projects called the infrastructure flagship projects. I will not discuss the detail because there is a press con on Friday where our flagship advisor, Secretary Vince, with other secretaries, will explain the new 112 flagship projects. But as of now, we are seeing 314 of the projects already completed as of June 2019 and 2,800 to be completed by 2022. And among the flagship projects, let's just wait for the press con for the details. But we are on track, and the mere fact that we have exceeded 5% of GDP projection in 2019 and 2021 and also maintained in 2022 show that our infrastructure program is now very well on track. Thank you.
Secretary Carl. Another question for you, sir, is about the power supply issues that the country has been experiencing of late. What is being done to avoid shortages when the economy fully reopens? Is it true that the transmission monopoly has been the main reason for the shortages? And can the NEDA have influence over ARC?
And my suggestion is direct the question to Secretary Kusi because he would have a better and fuller understanding. So I generally don't try to speak until I have a complete understanding. Although I read from the papers and hear this and hear that, I generally speak when I have a more objective basis. So thank you. Thank you for your patience on that.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I'll take advantage because question another directed for you. From Ditas Lopez of Bloomberg, she asked, given the current macroeconomic situation, which would be more conducive to faster recovery, an appreciating local currency or a depreciating one?
Neither, because the exchange rate is a price. It is dictated by demand and supply. And the market will bring the exchange rate to equilibrium. If you try to control it, then there will be many unintended consequences. Okay,
Thank you, sir. Yes. Sir, you're in demand. Another question for you on the commodity shortages from copper to corn and even rice. If the shortage is global, wouldn't that blunt importation as a solution to augment local supply? In the process, wouldn't that increase import costs and therefore inflation? Oil prices are also rising and meat costs are still elevated. Wouldn't these and the shortages mean the inflation problem is here to stay?
Okay, let me answer along this line. Our strategy has always been a dual or parallel effort to strengthen domestic production and to open the market so that we can attract higher quality goods at lower prices. In the case of food, we have done a very good example in the rice tarification. While we opened the market for importation to rice, we are earmarking all the tariff revenues and any excess collection above 10 billion for the next 6 years to improve the productivity of farmers. So we have to do both. In the livestock and pork industry, we are also doing both. We are going to support a plan to help local hog raisers improve productivity, but at the same time, we have to also be concerned about the people whose income have been diminished due to the pandemic and are paying very high pork prices, which last 2 months ago was 70% inflation. So we have to do both. Where the Philippines have a comparative advantage, we should support, and we can use our targeted incentives to initially help certain sectors grow. But we cannot give incentives and protect them forever. That is why we have a very good law right now, which is called the CREATE, which gives performance-based and targeted incentives. Now, we do not have all the financing, capital, technology, innovation, and management. That is why NEDA is pushing the liberalization of the economy by allowing more foreign ownership in retail, in public service, all compliant with the Constitution because we don't touch public utilities, so that we can bring in those technology, so that we can improve the competitiveness of our own products. So that is a strategy we will do so that we can both develop the local industry and at the same time ensure that the people benefit from better quality products at lower prices. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Carl. Another question for Ms. Gutianon Yap. Ma'am, the question is from Dory. She's asking, are you bringing in potential cornerstone investors for Philinvest REIT? Perhaps some sustainability-focused funds?
Well, our underwriters, UBS and BPI, normally they would always bring in anchor or cornerstone investors. That's really part of the normal process of any offering. And I think that we have a distinct difference in that we have a very strong sustainability feature in our field REIT. So I hope that as a result, we'll be able to bring in sustainability focused funds. You're
Thank you,
on
ma'am.
mute.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am. Secretary Carl, we have a few more questions related to the pandemic and how the government is responding to the pandemic crisis. One question is, I'll try to lump them all together. The question is from Melissa of CNN. She asked, you mentioned a 25% decline in economic activities due to quarantine restrictions, especially on children. How far along are discussions within the IATF on allowing minors to head out again? Meanwhile, how big a boost are you expecting as we allow fully vaccinated seniors to head out again? And like I said, related to the pandemic, a question from July Rada of Manila Standard. He asks, give me a second, sir. Reading the correct question. Do you expect the economy to be in the positive territory in the second quarter of 2021, given the pace of our COVID-19 vaccination program? Secretary.
Thank you for the question. First of all, I'm not sure if I said 25% decline, but I do remember saying that 50% of non-essential consumption, meaning outside food, is driven by families. And in a demographic profile where the median age is 24 years old, meaning half of the people are below 24 years old and 40% are below 18, then we have a problem, of course, when they cannot go out. I have been talking to some international observers and partners. No other country has a policy wherein the children are kept at home for the entire year, and no country has 100% closure of face-to-face learning. So these are the facts, and the consequence is because we have a young population and our economy is driven by consumption, especially by families, then these are the consequences. Now, how do we move forward from that? I think we should, number one, manage the risk, learn from the experiences of other countries so that we can get as many families and schooling back to normal. Of course, we will only do this if we can manage the risk. And two ways to manage the risk are, number one, to identify where the risks are and address those risks by sectoral or localized lockdowns or quarantines. Number two, we vaccinate as many people as we can in the high-risk areas. And that is what we are doing in the NCR Plus area when we expanded Category A4 to include all workers who go out. If the workers, meaning their family, parents, and then their grandparents are vaccinated, then the kids who go to school is unlikely to bring a deadly virus home. The kids can still bring a virus home, but being vaccinated also means you have some level of protection from the severe case. So this is what we have to do. Now, I'm looking at the data from the labor force. I'm looking at the data from trade, where import was 140% growth and export is 70% growth. I'm looking at the Google mobility data. All of them suggest a strong positive growth in the second quarter, precisely because we did not close down 75% of the economy. We allowed most sectors to operate. We allowed transportation to continue. Our curfew does not apply to workers. So all of these suggest a strong positive growth. But to sustain it, we have to do more. And the vaccination and management of risk and spending all our programs in an accelerated way will be going to help. Thank you.
Sir, just related to the topic on minors, what's the discussion like and so far as plans to reopen schools?
Well, that is currently being discussed. So I suggest we also ask DepEd. But the general idea is that in the lowest risk areas, we can at least pilot a hybrid form of learning, because most assessments show that non-face-to-face learning have very weak outcomes. And as a father who have to school with my 5-year-old son, I can see the difference. Thank you.
So we're all looking forward to the reopening of school soon. So we have a question from Gerard de la Peña, and he wants to
Yes, good morning, Secretary Carl. Thank you for gracing our event. Well, my question is, what are the new GDP targets and fiscal deficit targets? And basically, what is your outlook for the economy moving forward towards the end of this year? Thank you.
Okay, well, the Development Budget Coordination Committee met a few weeks ago, and we are seeing a 6 to 7% positive growth for this year, and I think 7 to 9% for 2022. Yusek Hill, do you remember the fiscal targets? May I defer to Yusek Hill on the fiscal targets? Anyway, there is a DBCC press release and statement, which I'm sure can be pre-circulated for the audience. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, for the deficit target, it's 9.3% for 2021. That's about 1855.6 trillion. It will go down to about 7.7% of GDP in 2022. But we continue to try to look for ways to improve revenue take and whatever expenditures are being planned now, additional expenditures, this should be deficit neutral. That's from the DLF point of view.
Thank you, sir. Another question from Ms. Gutianon Yap. The question is from Lee Chipongyan. She asks a follow-up to East-West Bank's, I want to pronounce this correctly, digitalization. You mentioned earlier that there are no plans yet of getting separate digital bank license, but does the bank see itself as a major player in the digital banking market in the future? And would you consider partnering with foreign banks or foreign fintechs to secure your place in the digital banking market?
Yes, we are heavily investing in digital initiatives for East-West Bank, which focuses both on digital and digitization efforts. We are always assessing developments in the industry, including whether Como will be spun off as a separate entity. We are always open as well to looking at strategic partnerships with entities that can make the bank become a bigger player in the various fields.
Thank you. Just a few more questions for Secretary Carl. I think this is related to the national ID. The question is whether contact tracing will be intensified by the time 70% of the population are already registered. And also, Secretary, I think there's some hesitation from other people about registering. Personally, I know people who've been asking me. I think there's just, a feeling of mistrust, I guess. Maybe I could also ask you, how do you address that in relation to that previous question?
First of all, there is no connection between the national ID and contact tracing. Contact tracing requires you to share identity and your whereabouts. The national ID is a foundational ID, so there is no connection. So those two are two separate projects and have totally different systems. Number two, I'm not sure about the hesitation because there are 36 million registered already. And as you remember, when we launched the online, the demand was far, far more than our system could handle. And so far, we have 36 million registered for step 1, 13 million registered for step 2, and so on. And we continue to communicate to the public the benefit of this ID. And everyone who goes through the system is appraised of the privacy by design manner to which this ID was prepared. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, just a few more, I think. For Secretary Carl, this is about, hang on, just a second, about REITs. The question is from Warren de Guzman. He's asking if the Department of Finance and NEDA will see infra REITs soon. When will you see
What?
infra REITs? Infra REITs, infrastructure REITs.
Oh, maybe DOF or
USEC?
Sorry, that question should be asked from Yusek Singson. I don't handle that area. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, sir. For Ms. Gutyanin Yap, another question for Doris. She asked whether you have plans to bring your energy subsidiary to public hands in the future, and how much capacity do you think you need to build up for it to be ripe for public listing, or maybe even using the REIT structure? And just to follow up on that, sabay ko na ma'am, is another question from Jen, Austria. She's asking whether the East-West is interested in Citibank's consumer business. Thank you.
Currently, there are no plans to list yet our energy subsidiary. I believe people can participate in that through the parent company, FDC. But you know, the REIT structure is something that may be a possibility, something interesting to look at. East West Bank has always continuously looked at different merger and acquisition portfolios. As you know, they have done 3 in the past, and so they're always on the lookout.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And since I see no more questions in the chat box, I think that's all we have for now. Thank you so much, Yusik Hill, Secretary Carl, Ms. Gutyanin Yap, for patiently accommodating all of our questions. It's truly a pleasure, and really, really appreciate it. Before you go, ma'am, EJAP is asking if we could have a group photo before you all go. Thank you so much. Chris?
Thank you very much, Karen, and thanks also to Secretary Carl Chua, Yusek Hill Beltran, and Philinvest President and CEO, Ms. Josephine Gautianon Yap. So, right before we conclude this program, let's have some photo op with our panelists. Okay, let's smile. 1, 2, 3. Another one. 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much. And on behalf of EJAP, I would like to express our gratitude to our speakers for gracing this event. Thank you very much, Governor Jokno, Secretary Dominguez, Secretary Chua, Secretary Avisado, Philinvest President Gautianon Yap, and also Undersecretary Beltran for joining us during the open forum. As we conclude this event, EJAP would like to thank Global Ferronickel Holdings Incorporated, SM Investments Corporation, SM Supermalls, First Gen Corporation, BDO, and Standard Chartered. And of course, a big thanks to EJAP's partner in holding this economic forum, Philinvest REIT, currently Cyberzone Properties Incorporated. Once again, this is EJAP Media Economic Forum, Philippines, paving the road to a stronger, more inclusive economy in the post-COVID era. This is Chris Mundo. Good morning.
Siglit. Yes?
Okay, update mo na kaya na.
If you look at the geography of the Philippines, there's really no other country before Philippines that would slow down the typhoons. So as the typhoon gets worse and worse, we get hit worse and worse. Philippines is number 3 in vulnerability to climate change. What I normally would encourage people is the private sector should work closely with the government.
SM Investments is one of the largest Philippine conglomerates. We've been around for over 60 years. We have 3 core businesses, mainly retailing, banking, and properties. Over the past 60 plus years, sustainability is something which SM has had as a culture. It's something which we as a group has been practicing from the very beginning.
We were among the first also who introduced the sewage treatment plant when it was not even required yet. Most of them we do it for flushing of toilets, for landscaping, and also for our cooling towers, which, by the way, air conditioning cooling towers consume almost 60% of water through evaporation.
BDO is the largest bank in the country, and it's one of the leaders in green finance. It's very active in financing renewable projects, one of its main focus really supporting the green energy program initiatives of the country.
We have been working with BDO through financing some of our major projects, if not all. I think they're present in most of the projects that we have in Aboitiz Power. Well, Aboitiz Power is involved in power generation and power distribution. The Department of Energy is driving actually the development of renewable energy through the National Renewable Energy Program.
We take into account the entire impact on the environment, including, let's say, providing sustainable energy, renewable solar powers, water treatment facilities, and waste recycling. We also provide, like, for example, for our malls, we make the malls more like a community center, which also then becomes like an area for relief effort if ever there's any sort of calamity that occurs. We also provide support in terms of education and training and healthcare, because at the end of the day, it's the sustainability of the community that continues to provide the growth for our businesses. Biodiversity is very important in everything that we do as a country and as individuals. For example, in our Hamilo Coast development, we work very closely with the WWF in terms of reforestation and also culturing more mangroves in the area.
SM's vision for its Hamilo Coast project is for it to become premier salt town development that incorporates sustainable practices in its planning, construction, and operations. We planted around 40,000 native trees in the area, and we protected it. This Hamilo Mangrove Forest is considered to be one of the largest here in the province of Nasugbu, Batangas. These mangroves absorbs 6 times more carbon, so they are good pollutant sink. Another importance of mangroves is they serve as nesting grounds for different species of birds and fishes. Also, for some migratory birds, this serves as their nesting grounds. Back in 2009, we took the initiative of having 3 of our coves as declared as marine protected areas. It helps stabilize climate change, and that's what really matters most. With SM, this project brought about life again in this area, and it is our commitment, these sustainability practices, that entice clients to come here and invest, live here, enjoy the surroundings, and enjoy modern living in harmony with nature.
There is this climate change that's looming over our Mother Earth. If we can contribute no matter how little, and if I can get everybody to be aware of it, I think we will make an impact. It's never too late.
We expect that our portfolio ratio between renewable energy and thermal would be almost 1-to-1.
Sustainability is very important because for a business to be able to continue to grow and last for many, many years, it's very important that the business support the community in a sustainable way. because in the end, it's also the community and the environment that sustains the high growth of our businesses.